Please be seated. Our program will begin momentarily. Please welcome the Chair for California Air Resources Board, Mary Nichols.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to what, in a very collaborative and non-competitive way, I would like to announce is going to be the very best panel of the entire conference. And it's your job to cheer, not me, but all the other speakers loudly so that they understand that they are really at the center of it all. I really am very happy to be here to talk about the zero-emission transportation revolution because we're in the middle of it, and so far the good guys are winning. We are now looking at a world that has more than 4 million electric cars in it. But I think it's important to remind ourselves, when we feel a little bit impatient, that it took us a long time to get to that first million. In fact, it took decades before there were 1 million from the time that people first started seriously working to try to bring them to the market, and regulators were trying to do whatever they could to get them there. So decades. Then to get from 1 to 2 million took about 17 months. And now we're adding another 1 million electric cars every 6 months. And I think it's going to go faster than that, because that is the rate of uptake that we see with new technologies that are going to succeed. And this is definitely a technology that is a success. In California, July and August were record-setting sales months for electric cars, including nearly 18,000 in August alone. And that isn't, yeah, you could cheer that one. 18,000 electric cars in August, and a variety of different models, all sizes, shapes, and colors. And frankly, that is not because we've been doing such a great job of convincing people that this is an environmentally sensitive, sensible thing to do. They're doing it because these are great cars. People want them. We know that they're lined up by the hundreds of thousands and waiting for their Tesla Model 3s. And many people are now getting their Tesla Model 3s. But even more significant than what they're buying now is the numbers of people who say that their next car is going to be an electric car. So over 20% of people who are polled, who are likely future consumers, are talking about the electric car that they already are beginning to anticipate being in their future. They want these cars because they know that they are the latest in technology. We also know that they want them because these cars are fast, they're convenient, fun to drive, and to operate, they're actually cheaper than conventional cars, not to mention not having to hang around in gas stations. So it's been an evolution to get to this point, but now it feels like we are rapidly approaching one of those hockey stick inflection points on the graph, where we're moving from a slow, incremental evolution to something that really is a revolution. And needless to say, we in California and the other speakers who are joining me here in a moment are part of trying to make sure that that happens, and that as people begin to look at the electric cars and the array that's out there of attractive cars, that they also know that there are going to be ways that they can use them, places they can take them, ways to make sure that they always have enough fuel, and that they will be as comfortable with them to the point where they don't have to think about what exactly it is that's providing the power that's moving them around. We are joining with partners across the planet in this effort. And in fact, today, I'm happy to announce that California has joined a global transportation decarbonization alliance, which is a new coalition for leading countries, states, cities, and companies that are committed to accelerating the worldwide transformation of the transportation sector to a zero-emission mobility system well before 2050. Now, as our first speaker, I would like to introduce the president of EmiliaRomagna, Stefano Bonaccini, who's going to talk about the critically important work that countries, states, and cities across the world to drive all of us towards a zero-emission transportation system. Stefano.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As President of the region of Emilia-Romagna, but also President of the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, I am very happy to be here today to celebrate and demonstrate the collective role of state and regional governments in global climate action. My region joined the Under-2 coalition in 2015. And we are proud to see it growing into the largest global coalition of state and regional governments committed to keeping global temperature rise to under 2 degrees. I attended its annual General Assembly yesterday, the biggest gathering of global state and regional governments on climate change, and I found it incredibly inspiring to exchange with other governors and ministers common challenges, but also bold emission reduction targets. We are ambitious and empowered climate actors, especially when it comes to clean and zero-emission transportation, where we often act as an enabling link between national government policy making and city and business action. State and regional governments are important players in supporting the shift to zero-emission vehicles. The government of Emilia-Romagna is committed to promoting the creation of the right regulatory environment that facilitates and does not slow down the uptake of zero-emission cars for our citizens and companies. Today, the government of Emilia-Romagna is stepping up our climate action, and together with 12 state and regional governments from around the world, we have joined the Zero-Emission Vehicle Challenge committed to take action to realize 100% zero-emission passenger vehicle purchased by 2050 and promote the rollout of zero-emission vehicles in our regions. These governments include Akershus County Council in Norway, Australian Capital Territory, the Basque Country in Spain, Broward County in US, Catalonia in Spain, Drenthe in the Netherlands, Lombardy in Italy, Navarra in Spain, Quebec in Canada, Scotland in UK, Washington State in US, and of course, California. Together, these leading state and regional governments represent over 83 million people and 5.5% of global GDP. And we are not alone. Cities, businesses, utilities, and partners around the world are all taking bold action towards 100% emission transport as part of ZEV's challenge. Over 3 million zero-emission vehicles are currently on the road globally. And with bold policy and decisive action by government and business, together we are creating the tipping point of a new transport revolution. Emilia-Romagna is proud to join these regions, cities, and businesses, and to commit to procuring only ZEVs for public fleets by 2030, to providing incentive for ZEVs purchase, and to promoting the rollout of charging stations. We are not only leading by example and looking at our public fleets. We are also committed to providing strong incentives for ZEVs purchased by citizens and businesses. such as financial incentive, technical assistance for companies, awareness-raising campaigns, and new ambition regulations and plans as the urban sustainability mobility plans. In addition, we are also looking at developing a comprehensive charging infrastructure network to support this transition, installing charge points at public buildings and on major highways, and supporting the installation of home and workplace charging. This is the transportation system of the future, and my government wants it to become reality well before 2050. The Emilia-Romagna region is particularly committed to signing new agreements with major electricity providers to install around 2,000 new charging infrastructures in the region by 2020, working with the main players in the sector to develop a plan of action to improve and promote the procurement and production of electric vehicles by 2020. Providing incentive for the purchase of the electric buses with the objective of achieving a 50% electric fleet by 2030, achieving the complete electrification of railway trains and system. The challenge we all face brings to mind Leonardo da Vinci and his work on human flight. By studying flight and observing nature and birds, Leonardo had an intuition that was light years away from the conviction of the scientists of his time, who thought flight was a mysterious, almost magical phenomenon. By studying the structure of birds' wings and their currents, Leonardo realized that flying was not beyond man's capabilities, that there was nothing magical about it. It was mechanics pure and simple. Leonardo and the devices he designed to aid human flight. The parachute and beating wings are a good example of how ambition can be transformed into a project. The zero-emission objective is the same. It will not be achieved with magic, just lots of hard work by our governance, citizens, and businesses. We are fighting for the most important thing, the future of planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For those of us who are perhaps a little bit geographically challenged, I did check right before the program to remind myself of where Emilia-Romagna actually is. And for those of you who may not be as familiar, it is the home of the city of Bologna, one of the most ancient cities as its capital, famous for its food, and also now famous as being absolutely the most progressive place for electric transportation. And we think that those things go hand in hand. That is, great food, beautiful buildings, a desire to protect the environment. It's all one package. So thank you very much. I'm now going to call to the stage our esteemed panelists. We're joined, and I think they will just come out in this order. Jesper Brodin, the president and CEO of IKEA. Mr. Brodin. Here. Paul Wheelhouse, Scotland's Minister for Energy. Hello. Leanne Enoch, who is the Environment Minister for Queensland, Australia, and is in charge of the Great Barrier Reef. And Ryan Popple, the CEO and President of California's own Proterra. Good. Thank you.
They switched us.
Yes, they did. Said one
And we have a chair for everybody? We do? Enough chairs?
We're going down.
We move everybody down one, and then I can sit. Okay, perfect. You can tell that this was heavily rehearsed. I want to ask if people who are standing in the back would like to come down and fill in. There are empty chairs, not too many, but there's a few. Raise your hand if you've got one next to you, because we want everybody to be comfortable and also to be up close. Okay, let's get started. Thanks. So to begin with, I'm going to start basically to my left and ask Mr. Brodin about IKEA, which, of course, is an international company with a very global supply chain and has to move a lot of stuff around. So how are you planning on addressing the greenhouse gas emissions associated with all that transportation?
So I have something exciting to share today.
Okay.
But let me begin with just sharing that for many years we have been pursuing a vision in IKEA, which is about creating a better everyday life for the many people, which means we support people with big dreams and big needs in life at home and thin wallets. Since years, we have taken that vision in a broader context into our supply chain and value chain with an ambition to become people and planet positive. And at this point, we recognize that global climate change is no longer just a threat, but it's a reality. It has an impact every day for our business, for our customers and co-workers, why we take a stand basically for stopping the talking and take action and leadership into many important areas. So when we look back, we have been reminded here today that we were quite early into some areas, reducing or taking away PVC from our range back in '91. We have taken away bad foam for our packaging. We have taken away basically wooden pallets, replaced with paper pallets. We were a pioneer a few years ago phasing out incandescent lighting and bringing in LED. That was a brave decision for us that has had quite a big impact on a CO2 perspective. We also, what maybe people don't know so much about since many years, have been investing in up to now 1.7 billion euro in renewable energy, predominantly wind, but also solar, with an ambition that we intend to deliver to, that we will be neutral for our own operations by 2020. Now, we recently committed ourselves to go for electric vehicles in cities and in the last mile delivery throughout IKEA by 2025. And today, I'm happy to announce that we will step up the game and actually implement in 5 of our main cities already by 2020, 100% electrical.
Oh,
and that is, yeah.
Right.
And do you want to know the cities? And the cities are, they're not small. It's Shanghai, it's Paris, Amsterdam, New York, and Los Angeles.
Yay!
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 And finally, maybe just to say a note that it's a systematic shift that needs to happen. So we are happy for the collaboration with providers, with manufacturers and authorities. And as you might know, in IKEA, we have always said in the flat pack economy that you do your part, we do our part, and together we save money.
Yes.
Yeah. Now we say, in terms of climate, that you need to do your part. All of you here today and beyond will do our part, and together we will save the planet.
That's great. That's
Thank you.
terrific. Thank you so much. Okay, well, I don't know if we're going to be able to match that along the rest of the panel, but we'll do our best. Mr. Wheelhouse, Minister Wheelhouse. Scotland has been a leader in climate change for a long time. I remember when we were preparing for Paris that I met with the environment minister at that point, and we talked about the way in which Scotland is working on these issues, and there's a lot going on, especially for a place that has had a heavy presence and economic presence in the petroleum industry as well. So that adds to the challenge, obviously. Scotland has recently released its 3rd comprehensive climate policy plan, and that includes, among other things, achieving 100% renewable electricity by 2020, if I'm right. So how do the zero-emission vehicles fit in with your planning?
Well, you're right to mention that we've taken these issues very seriously for some time. And what we're trying to do is develop a package of measures which all strategies talk to each other. So we've developed an energy system, whole system energy strategy published last December, which supports our new climate change plan. And all of these are geared towards delivering the low carbon vehicle targets we have for 2032. So the idea is that we would remove the need for fossil fuel vehicles by 2032. That's because we are a devolved government within the UK. We don't have direct control over the vehicle taxation system and licensing system. So we're going to use positive incentives by investing in the infrastructure that's required by members of the public and businesses to sustain the use of ultra-low emission vehicles. And we're proud to be part of the work that has been taken forward by the Climate Group for a number of years, but now the Under 2 Coalition to further the electric vehicle, low-emission vehicle project. So it's a key task for us, and roughly at the moment 54% of the energy we use in Scotland is in the form of heat. We're a relatively cold country during winter, unlike San Francisco. But the remainder of our energy is taken by electricity, where we've had great success. 69% of Scotland's electricity is now provided by renewable sources, and we are hopefully making good progress. We had a double-digit increase last year in percentage terms in growth in renewable electricity, and aiming for that 100% target you mentioned. We've also set a 50% all-energy target for 2030, so that means we have to make much greater progress in heat and transport, and so hence the initiatives that are taken by IKEA and other key partners locally in Scotland, where we have many IKEA stores. We'd be keen to work with businesses like IKEA to enable the customers and indeed the staff at IKEA off premises to use electric and indeed hydrogen-powered vehicles where that's appropriate.
Right. So you did mention that you also have a policy that includes hydrogen then in your...
Yes, we set out two strategies, scenarios in our energy strategy last December, one which is a high EV scenario and one which is a high hydrogen scenario. The truth, as with all such strategic documents, is that the truth will be somewhere between those two. We're seeing some really good work happening in Scotland around the use of hydrogen for heavier vehicles like refuse collection vehicles, council vehicles, but we're also investing in the charging infrastructure through our government-funded initiatives around Scotland to create one of the largest networks of charging stations for EV vehicles. We're obviously a tourist destination. A lot of people come from mainland Europe and indeed the rest of the UK to Scotland to visit, and that's a fantastic thing. We've got to try and future-proof that tourism model for the vehicles that will be used by our visitors to our country, and trying to keep on top of the trends that are happening in mainland Europe as well.
Great. We can talk more about that in a little bit, but let me move next to Mr. Popple. There have been a lot of interesting and, for us, very exciting announcements coming out of Proterra. In recent years, you've been on a fast upward trajectory, which is great. Talk a little bit about your vision for a future of electrifying buses and heavy-duty vehicles and where you see that headed in the near term.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for including us in the panel. I think it's appropriate for technology companies like Proterra to be engaged in conversations with regulators like the Air Resources Board. Fundamentally, what we're going to do is we're going to answer that call. We're going to compete. We're going to go after the challenges that you put forward. So if the state of California or any large significant market puts out an ambitious target, like wanting to eliminate the usage of fossil fuels or wanting to get to 100% clean energy, we are going to invent the products, and we're going to market them, and we're going to refine them. We're going to make some mistakes, but at the end of the day, I think we're going to use competition and the factors of production and get it done. That is what we have traditionally done as a technology sector. From Proterra's perspective, our vision's pretty straightforward. We want our efforts to result in the elimination of the need for fossil fuels in urban mobility. That's it, full stop. We don't think that battery electric vehicles are a niche or a small sort of green portion. I was asked earlier today, where do you think electric vehicles are best deployed in a city? I said everywhere, anywhere where you don't want tailpipe emissions. But we also recognize that the city bus market isn't the largest vehicle category in the world. So that vision includes the full electrification of the bus market being really a beachhead or spearhead to other commercial vehicle electrification, because we do think it's very important that we demonstrate that one by one these markets will be able to wean themselves completely off of fossil fuels.
Well, that's a pretty good ambition, I would say. What about the issue that keeps coming up about whether these buses can really meet all the needs of urban agencies, the length of the routes and the need to be recharged frequently and all of that? How's that all playing out?
Yeah, I think, I remember maybe it was 10 years ago, I went to a presentation at Lawrence, Berkeley, the National Lab, and there was a race between competing new energy technologies, and a lot of them were described, and it was all hypothetical. Could a hydrogen vehicle do it? Could a biofuel vehicle do it? Could an electric vehicle do it? And all of those alternative energy strategies have their applications, but if you fast forward to today, where we are with electrification for markets like city bus, school bus, refuse, and I'd say regional trucking, this is now an implementation problem. It's not a technology problem. You certainly do need well-engineered product, If you slap together an electric vehicle, it probably will not make it up the hills of San Francisco. But if you do what we as innovators and designers do well, which is really challenge ourselves to perfect the product, there is no reason why a well-designed electric bus or truck can't run circles around a diesel system. I remind people all the time that we move submarines and aircraft carriers with electric motors. This is not a fundamental physics problem. You got to engineer it well, and then the other thing we've got to get really good at is doing complex things with the utilities. We have a history of doing that. We've done big things in this country before. It's no more complex than a small data center, but it's work. So I think we've got to roll up our sleeves. We've got to set targets, work together well, but there's no... Proterra currently holds the world record for the longest range electric vehicle. That bus on a test track went 1,100 miles. Most buses run 130 miles a day. So at this point, it's more of an organization and an implementation problem. There are no physics challenges to bus electrification.
No, I think the challenges tend to be more the built-in assumptions about how people work. It's a transition issue, and maybe that's a good note on which to turn to Leanne and ask the question about how Queensland is approaching the transition to electrification in your jurisdiction. I assume you have an overall policy for Queensland as a whole.
Absolutely, and hello everybody. And before I begin speaking, can I just acknowledge the First Nations people of this place on which we meet today. For those who, oh, thank you. Sorry. That is standard in Australia that we do that. I'm a First Nations person myself. Before I begin giving you the story about the transition, maybe many of you don't know where Queensland is or what Queensland is, but it is the second largest state in Australia. It's the home of the Great Barrier Reef, so it's the northern eastern side of Australia, the tip, if you like. If you want to understand the size of the place, we're about 4 times the size of California. We're about 2.5 times the size of Texas in terms of landmass, so very large. But we only have about 5 million people that live in that large amount of space. We've got about a 1,900 kilometre, larger than that, a very large road network, incredible road network, nearly 200,000 kilometre road network. And you can imagine, for 5 million people across that vast landmass, there is a lot of personal vehicle use that happens in that space. We've not been a great take-up for electric vehicles in Queensland, and that is the case for Australia. So in Queensland, given that we are at the intersection of all the impacts of climate change, we have the Great Barrier Reef right there in our backyard, and that is seeing the impact of climate change like you'd never believe. We have persistent drought. We're seeing more frequent and extreme weather events. All of those things that we all know about are happening in one place in Queensland. So we know that we have to take many different forms of action to be able to combat that. And looking to transition fossil fuel dependent vehicles into electric vehicles is one of those ways. We've established a electric vehicle transition strategy for Queensland. It's the first of its kind in Australia, and we've absolutely dedicated our energies to that. The Queensland government has about 10,000 vehicles in its fleet, and we are transitioning all of those vehicles to electric vehicles. We have just this year completed the longest electric vehicle superhighway in the world in one state. So, you know, that is about 1,900 kilometres of electric superhighway. So we've set the infrastructure to be able to take what we hope will be a growing market with regards to electric vehicle, and we're leading the way as the government. We're setting the policy direction, and we're giving the strongest indication to our citizens, to industry, to investors, that this is the place where we want to see electric vehicles being, well, our vehicle fleets and our vehicle use being transitioned to.
So the common theme here is, and admittedly there was some selection involved in this panel, that electrification is really being led by the heavy-duty or commercial transport rather than necessarily by the consumer individual vehicle market. Obviously, there's a relationship between the two, and a lot of the discussions and excitement, including my opening comments here, are around some of the exciting new kinds of passenger cars that are out there, which I think have caught most of the public attention. But the reality seems to be that as we move towards a faster kind of changeover to zero emissions, it may be that the leading edge is actually somewhat less glamorous vehicles. And I know IKEA has a multitude of different kinds of vehicles, including the little forklifts that run around inside your big stores. I'm curious if you can give some kind of a breakdown of the kinds of vehicles that you're really talking about.
Well, Mary, I was just thinking if we have any glamorous vehicles. I haven't run into it. Maybe a few days ago I was in Hungary, and we are replacing our trucks for inventory with drones. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit glamorous, maybe, at least fun. But no, but I believe the point is really that all of us need to do our share. I think the private cars, when it comes to the big transportation, all of this adds up, like the science-based target approach in an equation for us to reach our goal as set by the Paris Agreement. So I think all these parts need to come together. And what I think, listening to my friends on the panel here, also, we're all working, and we are getting to a point where we are coming together to resolve things, because none of these issues can be resolved by any one of us, but it's together.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a good point. From our California perspective, I think it's close now to half of all the emissions in the transportation sector, which is our biggest sector, are from heavy-duty vehicles. And so we can't afford to just ignore them and spend all our time worrying about individual transportation. But there's also a big change going on that's certainly been written about a lot in terms of the models of how people transport themselves and whether they're going to be using shared ride services and not owning their own vehicles and all of that. I don't know whether this is part of the thinking that's going on in Scotland, but to the extent that you could comment on it, that would be helpful.
Absolutely, it is. We are looking at what we call mobility services. Mm-hmm. So trying to harmonise the sort of the needs of transport with the increasing availability of data to try and help look at what's the best mode of transport to get someone from A to B. It may be a combination of different modes of transport. It may well be using AI technology in the future, obviously autonomous vehicles, other innovations, and there's a great deal of work going on in Europe, but certainly Scotland we would regard ourselves very much being part of that story. Currently, about just to give you some detail, 1.1% of the Scottish market is ultra-low emission vehicles, which is low, far lower than we would like, lower than countries like Norway, for example, who are further ahead of us in this. But we are seeing growth at 29% a year, which is far faster than the UK as a whole, and more comparable with Japan and the United States, actually, in terms of market conditions. But so we're seeing rapid growth. We aim to have 200,000 ULEV sales by 2032 annually. So that's to give a sense to any motor manufacturers in the room as to the opportunity in Scotland, and the Scottish Government wants to work with them in that. But we're seeing initiatives in areas like taxi services. Obviously, we have disruption in that market already from Uber and other companies, but we're seeing in future perhaps it'll be more automated in its nature, and even potentially freight traffic being, I've seen experiments in the United States with automated HGVs as well, delivering freight and in convoy format going down roads. So there's lots of innovation going on, but certainly mobility services, I think, is a term we're going to hear a lot more of in the future, about how you bring together that power of data and all the devices we have and the availability that everyone has, smartphones these days, to pick ultimately the most efficient means of getting from A to B. And that may not involve you owning a car anymore. It may well be that you, I know motor vehicle manufacturers looking at comparable models in areas like mobile phone contracts, where you just buy miles or days of a car service. So I won't name the manufacturer, but one German manufacturer I spoke to was suggesting that there may be in the future you will have a certain number of days of perhaps a roadster, a certain number of days of a state car, and you will be able to pick different vehicles for different purposes. So it will change the ownership model as well. So that offers an opportunity for institutional or corporate investment in ultra-low emission vehicles, because it's not the individual customer that's having to buy the vehicle. But what government can do, I don't know whether this is happening in Queensland, but certainly in Scotland, we are also providing low-cost loan finance to customers to buy ULEVs to help break into the market and get more mass ownership of those vehicles.
So you have also quite a heavy tourism industry, a considerable tourism industry. You see potential there also for getting people into electrified vehicles?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Obviously, some of our areas like our national parks, we could make vehicles available for people to hire. Certainly what we're trying to do is use our main tourist routes, similar to Queensland, but a shorter route than the one you described. We're trying to turn A9, which is the main arterial road from Edinburgh, the capital, to Inverness, the Highland capital, if you like, a very popular tourist route. We're dubbing it the A9, the electric highway. We're trying to put in as many vehicle charging points on that route to deal with the range anxiety issue that people have. And also in key tourist routes, such as we have a new route in the North Coast 500 or NC 500, a 500-mile-long route, which is very popular now with tourists. Similarly, we need to make sure there's the appropriate infrastructure so that people can take that route in a low-emission vehicle and not have range anxiety.
We're going to be bringing out a couple of representatives from major electric companies in a little bit to talk about their role as the new fuel suppliers. But I'd be interested, Ryan, if you have any thoughts about the changing relationship between what was once a car or bus company and the oil industry versus what it's like dealing with a different kind of fuel supplier.
Yeah, it's a major change, and the oil companies aren't going to go quietly. I think they are aware of the market share statistics that you cited in terms of how much fuel they can depend upon your bus fleets and your truck fleets to consume year after year. In fact, what's really concerning from a heavy-duty perspective is the correlation between GDP growth and heavy-duty vehicle emissions is almost perfect. So we don't have a model for growing the economy, at least not in the US or California, where our heavy-duty fleet emissions flatten or go down. Whereas on the light-duty side, knock on wood, we can hang on to the regulations we've got, we've actually seen economic productivity occur with fuel efficiency on the light-duty side, but nothing like that has happened on bus and truck. So if you're an oil company, in some ways, the bus and truck sector is like Old Faithful. It's always going to be there, and you can predict these bus routes have to be run, the trains have to go, and there's no way that Amazon.com is moving something from point A to point B without buying fossil fuels. What is really interesting about the change in the model that I see is I think electrification is going to help make cities and utilities a lot more healthy. There's a big trend in California, obviously, where we are seeing local entities take more control of their electricity supply. And when they do that, whether they're working directly or indirectly with their utility, they're insourcing and they're creating kind of a money multiplier effect in their local community. So we can take the billions of dollars that we are spending in California alone on fossil fuel, and we can put that into utilities. And whether they're community-owned or they're investor-owned, will be increasing the revenue of businesses that exist within the state. Electrification, we found, is a forcing function to update the grid. So we're deploying electric buses in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. and Nashville, and there's transmission and distribution that's getting upgraded that no one's touched or thought about in decades. If the buses are the first thing that cause those investments to be made, that's great. We know those investments need to be made anyway if we're going to be more resilient, if we're going to handle more renewable energy. So I think there's been a classic tension between fleets and oil companies. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen, especially with cities, is that tension will be gone. Mm-hmm. They will be buying the solar energy they produce, or they may be generating the PPA that their own utility can use to finance a solar or wind project.
It's a much more integrated system. How about from the perspective of Australia, or at least of Queensland? I know you're not speaking for your national government, but for obvious reasons. But can you talk a little bit about your projections out into the future about how you will be charging all these electric vehicles? I don't know the statistics, but I would assume that you have coal power just like most of the rest of the country does. Yeah. Do you see that as being an impediment to further expansion? Or, as Ryan says, is this going to be a way to now change over the fleet?
Absolutely. There are numerous benefits from transitioning to EV. Some of them have been highlighted in our transition strategy. But I'll give you some of the top ones around this, and I think this is where citizens will start to drive this for us as well. We know that it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so we know that. You know, we've got targets that we've signed to in terms of the Under 2 MOU. You know, zero net emissions by 2050, that is our goal in Queensland. So this transition will assist with that. We know that it'll support renewables, and we have targets around 50% renewables by 2030. And we will far surpass that as a result of this movement towards EV. We think that it'll improve grid utilisation, absolutely. But on top of that, it'll also reduce the cost, transport costs to the citizen themselves. An interesting fact that if you have a look at the strategy, we estimate that Queenslanders spend about $5.8 billion on fossil fuel each year to power their fossil fuel vehicles. EV will see a 60 to 90% decrease in that cost to a citizen. Yeah. So that is what is driving you know, our passion and power into this idea of transitioning to EV. That's why we've invested in this electric superhighway, so that we've got the infrastructure there and we can start driving people to that those locations. We've even incentivised that further. It is free to charge at those locations until the end of this year, and we'll review that, seeing what kind of uptake we have around transition to electric vehicles. But on top of that, it's going to create more green jobs. You know, it's going to reduce oil dependency. It just goes on and on. Right. So I think understanding that and the hip pocket as well for the citizen, what we'll see is a greater migration into the use of EV into the future.
Thank you. I have been given a very strict time allocation. I wish I could continue this conversation because there are more questions I'd like to ask all of you. But I'm just going to thank you very much for great comments and for all the work that you're doing, and hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Pleasure. It was great. Thanks, Ryan. Terrific comments. Thank you. All right, we will let the panel move off in that direction while I introduce our next speaker. We are very pleased to be joined by the Deputy Secretary General of the Shenzhen Municipal Government, Wu Yu, who is going to be talking to us about what Shenzhen has been doing with their electric bus fleet. I had the opportunity to visit Shenzhen myself a couple of years ago and to see for myself some of the very interesting and progressive experiments. I won't call them experiments, but initiatives that were being taken in that amazing city, which is essentially a new city. And so I would like to invite the Deputy Secretary General to come out now to the podium and give us his comments. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's my honor to be here for this summit. Because of the limited time, I have to very briefly and shortly to introduce Shenzhen. Shenzhen Municipality was established in 1979 and became a special economic zone in 1980. That's China's first special exam room. In about 38 years, Shenzhen staged a miracle of industrialization, urbanization, and modernization. At the end of 2017, the permanent resident population was over 12 million, and the GDP was over 2,300 billion. As an explorer, Shenzhen is in the leading position in many social and economic indicators. We are also the first city to implement low-carbon sustainable measures and practices. Shenzhen features the lowest level of carbon emissions, water, and energy consumption to produce GDP. And our air quality is among the best of all Chinese municipalities. With lower energy consumption and environmental impacts, we have discovered a new pathway for sustainability and high quality of life. Shenzhen has seized the great opportunities in low-carbon development by prioritizing its mission to build a pilot low-carbon city, emphasizing on compact urban planning and group layout. We incorporated low-carbon idea into every detail of its construction and development. The city planned the first environmental protection zone in China, which covers over 49% of total city area. The driving power for all this is innovation, and the number of PCT international patent applications exceeds 20,500 in 2017. Just as a single city, we accounted for 47% of total applications in China. And we have the largest scale and the strongest cluster of national strategic emerging industry in China. And based on its carbon emission situation, the city has established a carbon emission trading system that includes both direct and indirect emissions. Shenzhen promotes energy structure optimization, develops renewable energies, and increases clean energy proportion. Actually, there are 7 significant decreases in energy and resource consumption. And the public transportation covers over 55% of total traffic load. And right now, over 150,000 new energy vehicles are running in Shenzhen. And we promote a green harbor and a green airport by applying onshore power, low sulfur fuel, solar power, and bridge equipment power supply. Shenzhen targets at carbon emission reduction from vessels and aircrafts. And Shenzhen actively engages in international low-carbon corporations, partnering with California, the World Bank, R20, C40, the WWF, along with other governments and organizations. In conclusion, Shenzhen is in middle term and later period of industrialization with comparatively low carbon emission. But emission from transportation and infrastructure sectors are growing faster, resulted from the increasing population and economic development, which places great challenges to the realization of the peaking of carbon emission. And we will carry on its green development strategy, strengthen tangible collaboration with other regions, and consistently contribute to climate change, mitigation, and sustainable development. Thank you all for your patience and listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think Shenzhen is well known for being a place that's been a leader within China on many fronts, one of which, of course, was being the first of the pilot cap-and-trade programs to get up and running, and that has also put them in a tremendous position to play a leadership role within the country and internationally on climate issues. So our next panel is going to consist of two individuals who I'm now going to call to the stage. Tom Fanning, who's the chairman, president, and CEO of the Southern Company. What else do you do with it? Do you have any other roles in the company? And Ron Nichols, who is the president of Southern California Edison Company. And I'm going to join them over here for the panel.
Are you going to sit here or you want to sit there?
I think. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. So this is a panel of the oil companies of the future, right? That's right here. You know, I want to say a word here, again, on behalf of the state of California and the work that we've been doing on infrastructure for zero-emission vehicles, because this is something that we've been at for a long time, going back at least to Senate Bill 350, which required our investor-owned utilities to support transportation electrification within the state. And then just last year, Governor Brown issued an executive order which called for what at the time seemed like the largest possible plausible number, 5 million ZEVs by 2030. And now, of course, we're beginning to think that maybe that wasn't quite ambitious enough, but it was pretty bold, and outlining a $2.5 billion plan to get at least 250,000 charging stations in the state, including the goal was to have more fast chargers than gas stations, as well as 200 hydrogen fueling stations by 2025. So that really reflected an understanding coming from the state energy agencies, as well as our electric utilities, and of course the Air Resources Board, that having the charging available, visible, affordable, and in some real way integrated into the state's transportation planning was going to be essential. It wasn't enough to just put a bunch of electric vehicles out there and expect everything to sort of work out. Well, I know this is an issue that you both have been thinking about quite a bit. And so maybe I would start with you, Tom, since you're next to me here, and just say that, you know, you're in a business which is not just located in California. You're all over the place, including in states where electric vehicles are not part of the official policy of the state. And so I don't know how you think about this commitment to electric transportation that you have, but maybe you could give us sort of an overview of how you work in that broader context.
Sure. So Southern Company is the second largest power company in the United States.
Right.
We're, from an energy production standpoint, we're about the size of the nation of Australia. We have recently made a commitment to low to no carbon in terms of RF fluence by 2050. And we have been killing it. I suspect that we'll do better than that. We're down 36% on carbon emissions since 2007. In order for us to do that, there are a number of initiatives we need to follow, including kind of this all the above. But one of the others is a commitment to research and development and to continue to move technology along. I think we always underestimate that as a nation. Mm-hmm. When I think about electric transportation, it is critical for us to succeed. And certainly in our area, we don't need executive orders or legislation or mandates. We certainly appreciate support. But one of the things that I think you would maybe be surprised of, at one time we had a state tax credits. Atlanta, which is where Southern Company is based, had the second greatest penetration of electric vehicles in the United States. This is good business for us. But if I wind it back to this commitment of low to no carbon by 2050, our ability to displace with electricity big bad foreign oil particularly, is something that allows us to achieve a national and even global objective in a very effective way. And the ways we do that are really pretty simple. You know, when we think about Proterra you just had, and you had the woman from Queensland. Well, the southeast United States, this is where most of our franchise territories are, also have some big urban areas, but also some rural areas and long drive spans and everything else. It is clear to me that as a matter of policy and good business for us, that we should be promoting infrastructure in all of the urban areas. And in my view, we should own the plug, if you will. The other thing we can do is to convene the players in the electric transportation industry. That is, in certain pieces of real estate, let's bring together the various model makers of electric vehicles. Let's bring together the charging equipment. Let's bring together people that will go out and install it. It's a big deal. The other thing, and just to finish my opening statement here, would be this. Not only do we think about cars and buses, there's a whole lot more that we can use to displace nasty carbon-emitting fuel. We have electrified the ports of Mobile and Savannah. And when you invariably die in life, if you are lucky enough to go to your version of heaven, you will pass through Hartsfield Airport. And on your way to make the transition, you will look out your window, whatever that is, and you will see electric ground control equipment, no diesel, in Hartsfield Airport.
And you'll stop and pick up some barbecue to take with you and on the way to heaven, right? And it'll all be set. Ron, I know that Southern California Edison has been exceptionally forthright in terms of your vision as well as your commitment to electric transportation. And all of our California utilities, of course, have been involved and have been very positive, but I'd say your vision is maybe a little more bold than some of the others. And I'm just curious about why you've decided to take on that posture.
Well, it is a really high priority for Southern California Edison. We have, for starters, we have about 400,000 electric vehicles in California today. And we did some work about a year ago at Edison to evaluate how do we get overall to the state's 2020 goals on greenhouse gas reduction. And we believe that we need something more like we said, not 5, probably more like 7 million electric vehicles across the state. That would mean about on the order of 2.5 million in the Southern California Edison service territory. So when we look at that as one of the larger electric utilities in the nation, with, we have 5 million customers, we serve a population of about 15 million people, we really feel that we not only have the opportunity, but frankly the obligation to do what we can to enable the acceleration of going from that 400,000 a day to a really major curve up to what we believe needs 7 million or so by 2030. And as a first major installment on that, we made a commitment to, subject to some regulatory approvals, to get 50,000 roughly chargers, the infrastructure, and then the incentives for others to own the chargers through rebates in our service territory, covering autos, medium and heavy-duty trucks, bus transit, and efforts at, as well, the ports being an important part, being the Port of Long Beach down here. That's in addition to anything that happens in single-family homes. This would include some multiple family homes as well. We think it's incredibly important to do that. We think that's necessary to move this. We think we can get that done by 2024 as a way to move things along. And the other major piece of that is we need to do that with clean energy. And the state has recently adopted some important legislation, Senate Bill 100, that provides for a 60% renewable portfolio standard by 2030, upping it from the current 50, and then a target of then 100% renewable by 2045. In our evaluation, we believe not only at Edison, we think statewide we can get to 80% carbon-free energy by 2030. And as a result, that creates the opportunity to have very clean energy that's displacing gasoline and diesel in those vehicles as we move forward.
So I want to actually ask both of you, maybe Ron, from your perspective, given how clean your fleet already is, as well as your plans for the future, you might want to think more about other parts of the world. But in the case of your portfolio with the Southern Company, one of the arguments that we hear a lot from the I'll call them the anti-EV lobby, for lack of a better term, is that electric vehicles may be okay in places where you're just using solar energy and wind and so forth, but that if you're going to be using coal, that it's really not a good deal from a climate perspective. And I even heard Mike Bloomberg this morning, I didn't try to correct him, say that maybe in China, because they have so much coal, they shouldn't really go all that far with EVs because, you know, they wouldn't necessarily be doing something that on net would be advantageous. I'd like to have that conversation with him, but I'm just curious how you respond to those questions about the relationship between rapid buildup of your infrastructure for charging and what the overall emissions profile is going to look like. You could.
I think it's a dominant solution. That's a completely false argument. Before I became chair, we produced about 70% of our energy from coal. It is absolutely clear coal is diminishing. It is very clear to me that this pathway to low to no carbon is kind of where America and the world is going. I'll stop. We were the largest owner of solar in America about 2 or 3 years ago. We're pivoting to wind, so we may have fallen to 3 or so. But this notion of going forward, it is the right thing for America to do. Now, one thing we need to do is invest in technology. Where we are today is not where we will be in 10 years or 20 or 30. Research and development in electric transportation in terms of charging time, in terms of battery life, those are the kinds of things. And in terms of improving upon the lithium-ion battery, these are things that we need to do. We invest proprietary research and development dollars in a big way to make that happen. We lean in. We play offense. We do not hold the waves off the beach. We influence the future.
Great. That's terrific. Ron, you want to just weigh in on this issue of sort of where we're headed in terms of not just coal displacement, but the whole viewing the system really as from a greenhouse gas perspective?
Well, because it isn't just transportation either.
Yeah.
In addition to transportation, and we think California's got a great start on that. We think we have a little bit to do with that. You have a lot more to do with that, Mary. Thank you very much for your leadership. But the next big piece that we need to work on then on top of that is in buildings, as we deal with both in residential and commercial sector, in both space and water heating, which at the same time, one of the benefits of both that type of electrification and particularly cars is as we get more and more, particularly solar in California, probably a little more solar than other parts of the company as a percentage, we're going to find times where we're otherwise going to be long on energy. And the opportunity to be able to regularly tell our customers between the hours of X and Y tomorrow or maybe for the next week, if you could just charge your vehicles or we can program your electric water heater to heat or pre-cool your building in a manner that uses that, it will cost you less money. We can give you a deep discount on that to do that, to maximize the use of renewable energy. That's a great opportunity to be able to to be as efficient as we possibly can, as cost effective as we can be.
So if you were talking to a representative of one of the countries that are here, let's just say hypothetically from Africa, where they may not have as much of a head start on electrification, you would tell them, don't worry about going all in on a system of electric vehicles, zero-emission vehicles, and build up your utility system along with that.
Well, you know, for developing countries, we have the problem in transitioning the telecom industry away from copper wire. When you're dealing in a developing country, you have the ability to start fresh with a clean sheet of paper and design it the right way. You don't have the legacy issue that many of us deal with. That's the way to go.
Good point. I'm being given the hook.
I think we're getting the hook. You're not.
You're probably going to stay.
I think they were telling me it was time to wind up and to thank the panel, which I am delighted to do. You know, my mission here on behalf of Governor Brown is to leave everybody with a call to action. So the call to action is, you know, take this stuff seriously, be more ambitious than you may think is possible, and let's move on.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mary.
Everybody.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.